This is a quick demonstration on mixing and pouring the Excalibur Dental Stone. Here's our reusable measuring cup, and I'm going to nest a cup inside of it. For an average size mold, like the Wizard's Tower, mold number 50, that sort of thing, I'm going to use about 1 3/4 ounces of water. So kind of, 1.75 ounces of water. You need just a little bit more water. And we're going to add enough powder to it. And I think basically for the Excalibur, it pretty much just doubles in volume. In other words, 1 3/4 ounces of water is going to end up being about 3.5 ounces of mixed material. And that's about what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to pour it in and let it sink in, as we do with most of the stuff. And I'm kind of spinning it around, and where there's a lake of water forming, I'll try to sprinkle on that lake of water. And let's see, we'll sprinkle a little more until it stops soaking it up. Okay, it looks like it's getting kind of close there. I've got some dry mounds of plaster on the top, and it's starting to soak in, kind of slowly. And I'm going to pour a little bit more on the lake of water there. That, I think, is pretty close to about the right amount of water. If you do it by eye, let's see if I can get this down. You can sort of see in there we got some dry mounds of plaster, and the stuff is kind of soaking up into it, but there's certain areas that kind of look like dry cracked earth. Let's see what we got here ounce-wise. We are at about, well, if I turn this, yeah, we're at about 3.5 ounces. If this was turned to the side a little bit more, you probably could see it a little more at just about 3.5 ounces there. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix this up. And it starts out a little thick. The Excalibur is a dental stone, but it does have some sort of flow agent in it, just a little bit. I wouldn't really call it a flow stone. It's a little bit thicker than the Merlin's Magic dental stone. I haven't seen anything flow as good as the Merlin's Magic. But this stuff still flows. It flows pretty good. You can kind of see about what it is. You could add a little more powder to the water if you wanted to, but I think that's really pretty good for what we've got. So next we're going to go ahead and take our mold, and we're going to spray some sort of surfactant, either your homemade version or Russman debubbleizer or the Allmore surfactant here. Knock off the excess. And I'm going to go ahead and pour it in. Now I'm kind of zoomed in so you can see how this stuff pours in. This stuff really pours in pretty thin. It's not quite as thin as Merlin's Magic, and I can mix it a little bit thicker, but it does flow pretty well. It flows a whole lot better than plaster of Paris. So this is how it flows. Like I said, pour on the ridges between the blocks if you can, and try to fill up most of the pockets that way. It looks like that's going to work out pretty good, about like that. And you see how it doesn't really all the way flow in, but it still flows pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, I've got it on a book, and I'm going to just use a screwdriver this time, and I'm going to tap on the bottom of the book. And you see as I tap on the bottom of the book, you can kind of see bubbles come to the surface. I still need a little bit more material in the mold here. Let's get the rest of that out of that cup. Here we go. Now let's take a close look at this mold as we tap it. As we tap it, you're going to see bubbles coming to the surface. See all those small bubbles? Some good sharp taps will probably get most of the air bubbles out for you. Now the Excalibur is just a bit different. You noticed we had less powder to water ratio than the Merlin's, and also the set time is a bit different. I'm going to go ahead and set this for 10 minutes and go ahead and start it. This is going to sit here for 10 minutes in the mold because right now it's still pretty liquidy. After 10 minutes it will have firmed up enough that when I scrape it, I believe I can get a pretty nice flat area on the top without the blocks being recessed or sunk in. Okay, 10 minutes has gone by and I'm about ready to scrape the mold. But I did want to point out kind of an interesting thing that the Excalibur does. For some reason it sinks in a little bit. I don't know if you can see up here these cracks that are up at the top. It's kind of an interesting little thing. It's like the water goes to the top and the material kind of soaks down to the bottom. And you can also see the impression of the blocks that are in the mold. And the reason you can see the impression of the blocks in the mold is because that thickness of block, all the powder material slowly sinking down into the mold, whereas on the ridges, there's no place for it to go. So this is one of those materials that probably wouldn't work quite as well with the glass method, because you could lay the glass over top of it, or the plexiglass over top of it, and after it cures, the material, will sink down before it cures, leaving your blocks a little bit short. So what I usually do, I used to put a paper towel on here and soak off the excess water, but people would always get confused because they'd lay it on and try to pull it off too soon and pull off all their plaster. So instead, I'm just going to scrape over the top and scrape the water off the top. So if I just gently scrape across the top, there's pretty much a lot of water that goes there. And even after 10 minutes, this material is still a little bit liquid in the mold. Whatever they put in the Excalibur still helps it flow. Now, it doesn't flow as crazy as the Merlin's Magic does, but it still flows real well, and it's a pretty fine powder. So what you can do is just sort of gently scrape over the mold, like that, and clean it off, and that's pretty much it. Now, these longer pieces or the wider, deeper pieces still want to kind of, do that sort of thing in the mold a little bit. And you notice this smaller block right here is sort of humping up, although you probably can't see it from your angle. So I'm going to scrape over it one more time, and I'm just going to kind of lay it down, and then I'm going to just go slow over it. And that's really, really a pretty good scrape right there. Okay, about 20 minutes has passed since we scraped it. Let's see how we did. Let's take this, and these are firm enough to pop out of the mold. And I think we did a pretty good job on these. I'm not really seeing much air bubbles. If I put them up close here, if you look at the sides, I think they actually turned out pretty good. And the bottoms really turned out pretty flat. This piece is a little harder one to get the bottom flat on. You can see that, there's just a slight bit of ridges on there, but trying to get those scraped flat. But it's fine for most purposes. I don't think there's really too much of a problem with that. That's pretty much it for the Excalibur. Excalibur and Daikin are the strongest of the materials you can get. So if you want the absolute strongest, this is probably what you want to go for. It flows pretty well into the mold, but it doesn't flow like the Merlin's does. Merlin's, I haven't seen anything flow like the Merlin's, but that's not always a good thing. I mean, sometimes the flowing makes it really difficult to get the tops flat.